Hi everyone, my name is John and welcome back to my channel. It is the new year, January 12th, 2022, and I wanted to bring you a book review today. It's one of the reviews I've been catching up on, slowly but surely. Have a few more to go. This is the Lost Bronte sister, I guess the one that gets most short shrift. This is Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. 1848 was a pretty consciousness-shifting year for women on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Not only did a large number of political revolutions happen, starting in Sicily and spreading to Germany and Italy, but the king, Louis Philippe I in France, was forced to abdicate his throne. And needless to say, whenever you have political revolutions, that brings about almost always revolutions in household, in divisions of labor, in what men and women are traditionally thought to do or they should do. Back in New York, in the United States, you have the Seneca Falls Convention, the first major get together where women sort of decide on their own to discuss their own futures as important parts of society, their own cultural and social importance, and they end up drawing the Declaration of Sentiments, which comes out of the convention. And then somewhere in England, perhaps, like I mentioned, by least the far least remembered but most radical of the Bronte sisters, Anne, finished her second and last novel before dying just a few months later at the age of 29. I think some contemporary readers are just unable to appreciate the revolutionary quality of a book or a work of art or whatever we're looking at in the moment merely by virtue of the relatively quiescent times that we live in. Yes, wars still go on. Yes, there's still strife and pain and hunger in the world. But for people who are in a relatively privileged place in the United States, a lot of that is just, it's history, or it's so far away it doesn't touch us in the way that it would need to seem really vitally important. And of course, sexism and the patriarchy still exist. 3 waves of feminism have done a large part to even the level of the playing field between men and women. But when The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was published in 1848, the livelihood of women, 1849, excuse me, the livelihood of women was tied in every way to someone else. Tied to her birth family, specifically her father if she was unmarried, and if she was married, her husband. Not only were single women always considered the financial responsibility of another man, they were often viewed as suspicious and shamed for their refusal to marry or to remain married. So enter the protagonist of this novel, whose name is Helen Huntington, who in the well-worn fashion of the epistolary novel describes in vivid detail her marriage to the abusive and alcoholic Arthur Huntington, and the domestic abuse that she and her son both suffer at his hands. Again, this was in a time, it's important to keep reiterating this. This is in a time when alcoholism and other marital problems, up to and including physical abuse, were brushed under the rug in favor of a superficial appearance of civility and propriety. But lying never was Anne's way. and she saw the horrors of alcoholism and wanted to tell what she thought was the brutal truth about them. She had experienced them firsthand, mostly from witnessing the behavior of her brother, Branwell Bronte, who also died very young of alcoholism. So Helen, the main character, she arrives at this country manor, I guess, called Wildfell Hall, under the name of Helen Graham. And we'll learn later why she is actually using a different name. While those in the neighborhood think she might be anything from a witch to a whore. By the way, she does have a son and she's single, so, I mean, must be a whore, right? So some of the assumptions that they throw around about her in the first part of the book, because she is a single woman with a child, are just, I mean, they make you more than wince as a 21st century reader. But she catches the attention of one man in the novel, whose name is Gilbert Markham, and he grows increasingly fascinated with her. Despite Gilbert's gentle but persistent attempts at courting Helen, she shoots him down every time. She's kind of prickly. She's very, very direct, and she doesn't exactly ever tell Gilbert why she's not interested, but she makes it very clear that she's not. That they can be friends, that they can visit, but it's not going anywhere beyond that. So Gilbert kind of gets frustrated. Helen becomes exasperated having to keep telling him no. So she finally hands over to Gilbert her personal diary in the hopes that it will open a window into her inner life that will explain her personality and sort of her spiky rebuffs. Instead of entertaining Gilbert's romantic interest, she works instead from Wildfell Hall as an artist, a job associated, again, in the Victorian imagination with creativity and the solitary self. In other words, a man is an artist, not a woman. Women were allowed to pursue art insofar as it was associated with cuteness and domesticity, sketching and watercolors, something like that. But the pursuit of commercial art, like Helen was trying to do, she was actually trying to support herself and her son by selling her own art. That was completely out of the question for middle-class Victorians. So Gilbert gets around to reading the diary, and he uncovers a lot of Helen's past and comes to understand where she's coming from, in part at least. The diary reveals Arthur Huntington courting, more like gaslighting, actually, Helen, and their eventual marriage. After years of trying to reform Arthur and hoping for the best, she finally decides to cut all ties and leave Arthur, and has taken her only child, who is also named Arthur, with her. And now she spends her time trying to make ends meet as an artist at Wildfell Hall, hoping that her husband won't discover her whereabouts. And it should be noted that running away was not her first option. Anne Bronte makes it clear during the course of the novel that Helen has been painfully accommodating to Arthur, a man who has clearly proven himself not worth accommodating. He destroys her art supplies. I think he tries to throw them in the fire at one point. He encourages his son to use foul language and even drink alcohol to excess in front of his mother. This is probably a boy who's maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years old. And that is really the turning point for her, when he can be as much of a cad and a sod as he wants to, but when she tries to start when Arthur tries to corrupt her son, that's where she has had enough of it, and she gets the hell out of there. She politely asks him for a separation. He refuses, citing that he doesn't want to be the subject of any ill rumors. So, despite the living hell that Arthur has made Helen's life, she nevertheless returns back to their home when she learns that he has become deathly ill and eventually dies. There, Gilbert takes one more shot at Helen's hand, and I won't ruin it for you, but it is the year 1848, so you probably know what happens. I won't say it explicitly. Suffice it to say that the end of the novel puts on full display just the mediocrity and blandness of marriage, even to someone like Gilbert, who spends half of the novel trying to prove what an excellent husband he would be. Every once in a while, I walk away from a novel that has beautifully displayed what I sometimes refer to in reviews as the crushing smallness of people, or in this case, the crushing smallness of people and the institution of marriage. It's probably unfair to cast all marriages in the light of Helen and Arthur's marriage, but it should also come as no surprise that Anne's experience of her own brother's alcoholic rage drove her to such a dispiriting depiction of it in her fiction. In fact, it seems that each of the sisters drew inspiration from Branwell on how exactly you should deal with, sort of a dissipated rake like their brother. Jane Eyre overwhelms Rochester, right? Who doesn't seem that awful after all, unlike Arthur. And in Wuthering Heights, Kathy is every bit as sort of untamed and feral and wild as Heathcliff is, deals with him that way. And Helen, on the other hand, chooses the path of godly reform. The themes of Christianity in the novel are quite heavy-handed. Helen is an obvious, very devoted believer, and she is, and part of her belief, both in God and the relationship, is that she can mold a better man with God's help out of Arthur, and it turns out being a very, very potent and bittersweet mistake on her part. But that is not the end of the novel, but that is my sort of takeaway and mini analysis of it. And it's really, truly a wonderful novel because of the way that I think it takes a truly unflinching view of marriage at a time when marriage didn't get unflinching takes, for another, generations. But here's one straight out of early Victorian England, of all places. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. Highly recommended. Thanks so much, and I will see you next week.